Welcome everyone to this afternoon's workshop. The title of this one, which is a continuation of our workshop series under the ESPC campaign, is working with internal and external stakeholders to ensure a successful ESPC project. I'm going to advance to the next slide. So housekeeping for today. If you have questions during the presentation itself, we should have plenty of time to answer those. Either during the presentation, we'll have some deliberate breaks where we'll stop and answer. And we'll also have an opportunity at the end to wrap up with any questions that haven't been answered during the presentation itself. You can drop your questions in the chat box at any time. You can raise your hand and we'll stop, and however you'd like to do that. And the workshop's being recorded, but we're making this only available to the ESPC campaign public sector partners like yourself, so it won't be widely distributed. And we'll also provide a copy of the slides to you as a resource. Like many of the workshops and trainings we've done before, there's a lot of information that is contained in the slide decks themselves. More than we'll be able to go over today. So this will be a great reference for you going forward and to share with your colleagues. So advance. So again, we're your host today, the Energy Services Coalition. I'm Deb Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the ESC. And Chris Halpin, who is our lead technical trainer, will be doing the lion's share of the presenting and talking today. So we'll turn it over to him in just a moment. Advance, Chris. Chris's bio, which will be in the deck, and then about the Energy Services Coalition. So if you're not familiar, we've gone over this in the past workshops, but the ESC is a resource to you as a public sector leader in facility energy optimization, energy savings performance contract. We are a public-private sector partnership, so comprised half of public sector, local government, state officials that have performance contracting or facility management optimization as a task or a charge. And then the other half are industry folks. These are energy services companies. These are vendors and contractors that provide services. So the idea is rising tide lifts all boats. We learn from each other, and this is an educational platform. So we're working with the Department of Energy to support the ESPC campaign. And this training today, this workshop today, is really the next installment in that overall series of virtual support that we're providing. So Chris, you want to go to the next one? So while Chris is going over the workshop agenda, I'm going to start a poll looking at the names of you that have joined us this afternoon. Some of you are repeat attendees, and we appreciate that and hope you're getting value from this. If you've not already responded to these poll questions, please do. If you have responded in the past, you can just introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like, but no need to provide a full response. So we'll launch that as Chris is going through the workshop agenda.
All right, cool. Thanks, Dub. So I'm Chris Halpin, as Dub said. I'm sort of the ESPC subject matter expert for Energy Services Coalition, helping DOE and the SCEP group do this outreach to state and local governments all over the country. I've been in this business for 39 years. Next year will be 40 years. Worked for ESCOs, worked for consulting firms, and had my own ESPC owner's rep firm for almost 20 years. So I'm happy to be sharing some of my scar tissue wisdom, as we like to call it, with all of you to make your jobs a little bit easier. So today what we wanted to do is focus on sort of how to get started with a project, but really focus on gain the interest of and then engagement with internal and external stakeholders, which are absolutely required for you to get a project off the ground and completed, right? No one can do any of this on their own, right? It's a relatively complex delivery vehicle, but so worth it. So we're going to go over sort of an intro to ESPC stakeholder engagement, how you deal with an overview of how you deal with your stakeholders, assembling your team, both in internal and external teams, when to engage stakeholders, how to build your teams, then identifying and enlisting help from all these different stakeholders, both in-house and outside, including communications protocols, roles and responsibilities. We're going to talk about both considerations and best practices for each stakeholder group, so you can figure out where to focus your efforts. And then towards the end, we'll have a whole page full of resources you can click onto, and all the links in this presentation are live links. So when you get the final copy from Dub, it will have all of these you can just, in your own time, go through and take a look at. Then we'll finish up with some Q&A. What we're also going to do, being this is a workshop as opposed to just a regular training, every 3 or 4 slides, we're going to stop, pause, and take questions as needed, right? And then go through and get those questions answered, because we really want this to be more interactive, as Dub said. So next slide. Okay, it's not moving. All right. Okay, here we go. Can you see the acronym slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. Right. So I've tried not to put too many acronyms in this, but in order to save slide time, there's say AHJ, authority having jurisdiction, which is, a lot of external as well as internal considerations. CX is commissioning, Department of Energy, EUI's energy use index, right? And we'll read all of these to you, but if you need to go back to these during the presentation, please feel free. So we're going to get into the intro to the stakeholder management. So what really is this whole concept of stakeholder management, right? It's really, you really have to first ask why. Why do I need to get all these other people involved? And as I mentioned a minute ago, to really get one of these projects both off the ground, developed, implemented, and then monitored and paid for, you need to involve a whole bunch of different people, right? From different parts of both your organization and outside organizations. So one of the first things you really need to think about is setting expectations, right? Realistic expectations. Again, when I used to do this as an owner's rep full time, I'd show up with clients and they'd have varying levels of understanding of what this is, right? What performance contracting can do for you and what it can't. So really setting expectations at the very beginning with everybody that you're going to be in contact with is probably the single most important key to success, because you don't want to have people have an idea that they're going to get something up here and they get something down here, or vice versa, right? So that's probably the first most important thing. It also ensures timely input from the correct decision makers, right? If you need to have your fire marshal review design plans, you don't want to give it to them 10 days before you're getting your loan, right? That's just an example of getting everything lined up so you, throughout the life cycle of this project, you get the right people involved at the right time. It also increases buy-in and project support, right? Again, you don't want to wait till 6 months in to contact your in-house attorney to say, hey, Bob, by the way, we're doing this big project. Can you take a look at the forms for us, right? And they're going to be like, wait, hang on. No. You need to get involved from the beginning. And I've been victim of that one with a client of mine, a few clients of mine in the past, waited and waited. We kept telling them, get legal involved at the beginning, right? And they didn't. So it really works well if you get folks involved from the beginning. And at the end of the day, it enhances the project success and the impact, right? You can have a really impactful project if you include everybody that you need to, both inside and outside, right? I mean, there's community people you want to get involved in this as well. That can really help you get the word out and really help buy-in throughout the whole process. And the way to make all this happen is put together a stakeholder management plan, including stakeholder turnover. So the people, change jobs all the time. So you want to make sure there's something in that plan. And there's a whole toolkit around this, the stakeholder engagement resources at the bottom of the screen here. Again, we don't have time to go into that, but that's a great toolkit that DOE's put together for the MUSH market. Another set of keys to this is knowing who to involve, why, when, and how, right? For internal stakeholders, it's always good to get them involved from the very beginning. What I like to say, anyone that has veto power over your projects needs to know from the beginning that what you're planning on doing, right? And it depends on where the genesis of these ideas come from. But it's always good to get them involved from the very beginning, especially people in legal, whoever's going to fund your project, and whoever's going to procure the project for you. They're the three ones that are absolutely key. And you need all the others. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Sometimes you need very specific input from different types of folks to get various approvals and cooperation. And a lot of this comes down to the project champion, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, with an owner's rep, which we'll also talk about in a few minutes, to really help support that project champion to get you through the whole process. Another thing to be careful of is too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Decisions by consensus. Giving somebody the authority to get decisions made throughout the process is absolutely key. I've been involved in both ends of the spectrum here, where everything had to be done by 6 or 7 people in a room making a decision, to a retired Navy captain who just got decisions made. Bang, 45 minutes, we have a lot of decisions made. So you want to be able to figure out what's the right part of that spectrum for you. So putting the stakeholder team together, right? They're typically made up of these 8 components, right? Your project champion, and we'll go through each of these in detail in a couple of minutes, but this is the person who's internal. So you see at the end of each of these titles is INT or EXT or INT/EXT. It's internal, external, and internal, external, right? So sometimes you have both. So project champion, usually you're in-house, like your energy manager or chief sustainability officer, or director of public works, somebody like that, who's really sort of running this for you internally, and they're gathering everyone together. Legal, like I said, early on when I was young doing this, I didn't know this as well as I should have, and got learn some lessons with that. So you want to make sure you talk to the in-house attorneys first. Sometimes external attorneys, they might not get involved till later on in the process. We'll talk about that. Finance, again, this is all going to require lots of money, usually borrowed, either through a loan or a bond or something like that. So you need to talk to the finance and budgeting people early on. Procurement people, and with the finance, that's both internal and external, because if you're going to be getting money from outside, which is usually the case, right? A few of my clients have happened to have extra money laying around, which is rare, and it's going to be even rarer going forward. You want to have both internal and external stakeholders. Procurement folks are typically internal, your purchasing or procurement department. Your operations, maintenance, repair, and replacement folks are typically your in-house folks who are, running your systems and buildings day in, day out. You sometimes have outside service contractors. They're going to be part of this too. Their role may change depending on what goes on, but you want to have them involved from the very, very beginning. And we'll talk about that in a lot more detail later. Then construction folks, you may have design and construction folks. If you're a big enough organization, you have internal construction managers, and you want to make sure they're involved from the beginning as well. Sometimes you have outside construction managers you want to bring in. And then oversight, and we'll talk about this. This is really sort of your owner's representative you want to have helping you throughout the process, and we'll talk about that. And lastly, and most importantly, at the end of the day, is approval authority. So these are the entities, sometimes internal, right? The mayor, city council, school board. Externally, you may have board of regents, or if you're a university, you may have, the governors of states. Sometimes if these deals are big enough, governor's office needs to approve them. Again, we'll talk about all of these, but that's the primary ones we're going to be going through. So, and if you've been to these training sessions and webinars and stuff before, you've seen this slide, right? This is the 5 different phases that DOE uses to describe performance contracting. And stakeholder engagement really happens throughout this process. It's most important at the junctures where you have agreements being executed, where you see these blue boxes on the slide. But it happens really from the beginning, right? The very first part of planning phase 1, all the way through the performance period. You need people involved, on board, fully invested in the project and the process, listening to each other to make sure that this actually works for you. Any questions with the first intro to this?
And again, you can unmute yourself, raise your hand, or if you have a question, you can type it into the chat, and we will get to it. Okay, great. Thanks, Deb. We'll keep going then. Okay, so the first step really is identifying your project champion, right? And this is from one of our previous trainings. This champion is going to drive the progress, right, of the whole thing, build, site, and owner support, right, which makes sense. They're going to be talking to the folks who are actually out running these buildings.
and the executives who are going to be in charge of all of these buildings, and whether it's streetlights or pools, parks, whatever it is you might have, they need to be the cat herder internally, if you will, to get everybody on board, really working together. They're going to be responsible for getting everybody educated, and really bringing in those stakeholders, and getting them to talk together collaboratively. Because once you get an ESCO on board and financing people on board and all of that, you need to be a united team, so that you're speaking with one voice, right? That the best projects work that way. If you have too many people that are saying different things, it can become a problem. That's where you want to funnel most of this through your project champion, right? One of the other things they're going to do is contact your state energy office if you have one, and most states have some sort of an energy office. They're sometimes an independent office, sometimes they're buried inside it, like a Department of Administration or Finance or something like that. And we talk a lot about this in our campaign training, #1, which that link takes you back to the YouTube recording of that training. You can also join or build an ESPC network. That's, again, a live link that's part of these DOE champions toolkits, and utilize this toolkit, right? Again, we don't have time to get to all of these links today, but it'll give you a chance afterwards to go back and look through all of this. And this is an example. This is an actual slide from that, where you follow this upgrade plan, right? And I love this. I hadn't seen this until recently. And it shows you, again, some best practices of what you can do to put together a champions network. And this champion ensures the right people engage at the right time. Like I talked about a few minutes ago, you want to make sure you're getting people engaged early is the most important thing, but at the right time, right? You don't want to get into the finance folks until you know sort of how big this project might be, because you don't want to waste their time. Same with procurement people. You want to make sure there's some there before you get people involved in putting together a whole RFP. And somebody who understands the organization's processes, right? Usually someone who's been with your agency or your school district, whatever, for a while, and knows a lot of folks inside. That they're really the best folks for this sort of a role. The next one is engaging in owners.
Chris,
Yep.
if I can interrupt, so before you move off of Project Champion, a question came in. You've largely addressed this, but in terms of who is typically the project champion, what department or part of the team are they part of, or division do they sit in your experience? Yeah.
Right. Okay. So they're typically sometimes a leadership position. I've seen even like a CFO of like a school district run these. They're typically somebody who has a technical background, right? Usually an engineer or a public works person, or a sort of a high level maintenance person, right? Director of maintenance, director of facilities, associate vice chancellor for facilities and administration. I've seen in some of my university clients. That's typically who that is. Chief of sustainability. We've had like City of Phoenix, that chief sustainability officer was my client. So they're typically the folks that are assigned a project champion role. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that addressed the question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. Great. All right. I'll leave that chat open. Okay. All right. Now we need to go to the next slide. Bing. Okay. So the owner's rep, and I won't go through this exhaustively. This was in some of our previous trainings, but again, when I was doing this for Nesco in the 90s and there were no owner's reps, I had several deals that got tanked because the owner didn't really feel comfortable with what they were buying, right? And which makes sense. If you don't feel comfortable doing a $6, $10, $20 million deal for your university, school district, whatever, you don't want to do it, right? It's a really important legacy that gets left behind. So I started my owner's rep firm mainly for that reason back, almost 25 years ago now. And it was really to fill that hole in the marketplace. And it was really to help owners become sort of on a level playing field with the ESCOs out in the market who have, tons of engineers and accountants and finance folks and attorneys, and who can really sometimes intimidate folks who aren't used to doing this kind of a project. So I found, and when I started doing this for Department of Energy in their federal program, after a few years, they figured out that it makes the most sense. They did a few audits and figured out putting an owner's rep, and in the federal market, they call them project facilitators. They realized that the best outcomes are arrived at using somebody who can help the owner get through this whole process, right? It's like today you wouldn't think of building a new building without hiring a commissioning agent, right? That's the way owners reps are slowly working themselves into this marketplace and performance contracting. So it's a very important role. Again, I won't go through this in a lot of detail. You'll have these slides, but I find that it really helps long-term success, and it shows folks that you're taking this seriously by bringing in a subject matter expert. Like we would joke when I was, trying to sell these kinds of deals in the past that, would you go to your regular doctor for brain surgery? No, right? So you wouldn't go and hire your local mechanical engineer who designed the last high school chiller for you, right? You want somebody who really understands performance contracting, because it's a bit of a fine art. It's a mixture of sort of art and science and psychology. So there's some great links in here. The PCNRC that DOE has put together with the private sector, and this training certificate series that I helped put together with them. That's sort of an 8-module training course, really aimed at owners reps. But for folks like you that are on this workshop, it is a treasure chest of information. It takes quite a while. It's 15 hours or something altogether, but it gives you a certificate at the end, which is great. If you need CEUs or PDHs for any sort of certificate or registration that you have, it's wonderful. And then there's this white paper I wrote for DOE 7-8 years ago about using owners reps. All right, but we'll talk some more about that. Some best practices around this is getting started with them early, right? That's probably the most important one. If you're going to hire an owner's rep, get them in early to do all the stuff we're going to be talking about here, and really helping you if you're the project champion or if you have a project champion working for you. So any questions on that? And I know this is yes.
Thank you. I was wondering if all of these resources, including training, are available to all the team that is working on the ESPC project? I mean, even the external stakeholders?
Yes. Anybody can get access to those. This is all from, most of it's from the U.S. Department of Energy, Better Building Solutions webpage or website. And it's extensive, right? Extensive website with tons of helpful information. Then Energy Services Coalition website has got some of this. And at the end, we'll have links for all the resources we're showing in here are all on one page at the very end of this presentation, but they're really, anybody can access them.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay. And, another thing, this is a lot of information, and I know that, right? Kind of drinking from a fire hose. I would usually spend half a day with clients going through all of this stuff, right? And we're trying to get through this relatively quickly, but then get questions answered. And I'm going to be available, after, we'll talk about this. We have office hours at the end to go through some more of this stuff. But, again, please feel free to drop in questions whenever you have them. So communications protocols this is a super important thing. Again, when I was starting all this out, almost 20 years ago, I learned a lot of very difficult lessons in how to communicate well with folks. And it really is key to almost anything in life, right? Communication is the key to everything. The DOE's networking toolkit has a whole section of communications plan, right? We're not going to go through that now, but some of the keys are establishing communication protocols early, like who is going to be saying what to who and when, right? And I can't tell you how many times back early in my career when I was doing energy audits and then design and construction administration, where things were getting sideways because contractors are second guessing engineers and blaming each other and all of that, which rarely happens in performance contracting. You have an ESCO who's responsible for the whole thing, right? So as long as the owner's team works with their project champion and owner's rep to deliver clear messages to the ESCO and back and forth and in a collaborative sense, these things usually work really smoothly, right? And a lot of it is creating these protocols early on in the process. Every kickoff meeting starts off with, how are we going to be talking to each other today, right? That's typically how it works. Designate the lead point of contact, the POCs, absolutely critical. Again, so you don't have people second guessing and ending up with a game of telephone, right? I already talked about determining who to engage and when. Or again, and we talked about this some more later on. Who's going to be like taking notes and documenting discussions and so on. Your owner's rep is a great use for this. Once you get your ESCO on board, a lot of times they take over a lot of that. You want to make sure that it's clear who is going to be having that role, right? A Q&A and communication log is absolutely essential. And there's one I put into the last training that we did called a comment response resolutions log that Department of Energy created, and we put into our best practices guidance that has really helped us in projects. I can't tell you how many times, because every time an ESCO submits something, you come up with your questions and your owner's rep, they respond, you get them all worked out and resolved. And if that same question comes up 2 months, 3 months later, you can reference back to, oh, look at question 47, that's already been answered. Great, it saves so much time and aggravation. Another best practice for communication, if you do hire an owner's rep OR, make sure they're involved in every meeting, call, and email exchange, right? Because a lot of times you'll see they either get forgotten off email threads, or an ESCO or a vendor even will sometimes go to the owner directly. Hey, I have an idea for you, right? It's always best to get them involved in everything to really be the most helpful to you they can. So roles and responsibilities, again, I'm not going to really go through this. This is sort of a flashback from what we did the last time, but that's part of putting together a communications plan, is who's going to be doing what, when, of all the different stakeholders. And we're going to talk about that some more in the next section. All right, any questions on that one? Okay, I don't see any in the chat. Okay, so we'll keep going here. So okay, so for each stakeholder group, right, we're going to start with legal. The legal considerations, there's many, right? But some of the most important ones are if you've got existing either state statutes, or sometimes you're like National Guard is both state and federal. They have to follow both sometimes, and others. You want to make sure you're following them, right? We have an example here from DOE has a state ESPC legislation update that was done in 2022. I just grabbed one from Alabama because the performance contracting one was at the top, which is nice. But for every single state and the territories, DOE's put together a whole list, and there's a lot more than just the performance contracting at that link. So you can go through and check to see what sort of requirements you have if you want to do a project. Some of them apply only to state agencies, some of them apply to state and local, and some of them are separate laws. Like Arizona has 3 separate statutes, right, for different public entities inside the state. And you want to ask your state energy office, they have templates you can use. Most of them have templates. If not, you can use Department of Energy templates, which are in the process of being revised right now. And does your internal legal team have any ESPC experience? Most likely not, right? Because this gets done like once every 10 or 20 years, if it gets done at all, at some public agencies. And if not, you want to try to hire a legal firm that has experience with this, right? I've seen, a lot of clients in the past would go to their typical bond counsel who do when they're going to, build a new high school or a new water treatment plant or something, bring in the bond counsel who's used to running a standard bond, but that's not a performance contract. They maybe help with the financing part of this, but you really want somebody with performance contracting experience. And there's several pretty large legal firms around the country who've got 30 something offices who've got experience with this, right? And that's something we can talk about offline. So some of the best practices around legal is make sure your internal external staff agree on the process early, right? Like I've learned this one the hard way, right? Where your internal folks think, oh, this is all great, and then the mayor or somebody says, no, we need somebody outside to look at this, right? And it's already way out in the process, right? And it causes all kinds of problems. So you want to make sure you get those folks on early, get them to look at whether it's documents, whatever, early on, and get everyone to agree early on. Again, this united front I was talking about before you put an RFP on the street, right? You want to make sure everyone's on the same page. You want to set protocols for document review, like version control. If you've ever done documents and contracts, that's super important. Review all your template docs prior to putting this out on the street, so you don't have things coming out after the fact. We want to review anything ESCO submits back to you to ensure compliance and avoid contradictions. right? That's absolutely key. And attorneys should provide letters of opinion if needed on a timely basis, because there's sometimes waivers you need or whatever. Is it okay within the town charter to do this type of financing? Right? I've seen that one. Again, don't wait till 10 days before the lock expires on a financing. And the ESCO and financier should include any legal fees in the pro forma cash flow. So you're not paying for this out of your pocket. You can get this built in so that the savings is going to pay for this over 15 or 20 years. So, and again, we're not going to go through this. This is from one of our previous trainings, but like some of these documents that I was talking about, this is something that the whole team needs to become familiar with early on in the process, right? Before this becomes sort of public, you want to make sure everybody understands what documents are going to be used, right? Because this is, you don't ever want to have to use contracts, but if you do have to, you want to make sure they're clear and everyone understands them. And that way you won't run into problems. So next we have financial considerations and best practices. So what are your processes for funding facility upgrade projects now? It's typically capital appropriations you get every year, you put into the budget during budget season and kind of hope for the best, right? And see what you get. And that hasn't been working very well since the Great Recession, right? That happened 10, 12 years ago. Public entities still haven't caught up. The tax base is still not caught up to get back to where preventive maintenance, for example, and deferred maintenance are really handled. So you want to understand what they are. You want to help your finance and budget staff understand the benefits of ESPC, because it may be like, wow, if we consider this something different, let's consider this. We can be able to bite off a whole bunch of things that we've been trying to get funded for 10 and 20 years. One of my first projects when I was doing this for the feds was at a big Army base in upstate New York. And the energy manager said he was able to get in that one project 20 years of funding he'd been trying to get to do up his energy management systems across the whole base. And he said, you did it in 2 years with this project, right? So it was really amazing for them. And how's the money going to move from operating costs to note repayment, right? That means moving things from one part of the budget to another part of the budget, right? And again, we don't have time to get into those kind of details here, but it's those kind of considerations that need to be taken into account and need to be committed to full term budgeting, right? That's one of the beauties of this is once you identify savings, and you'll see that we show a slide with a chart that shows this in some of our other trainings. This goes from money we're currently just handing over to the utilities and outside contractors every month to taking that money, investing in our own facilities, and amortizing it over a long period of time, right? And you pay for that out of your budget on an annual basis. So it fences that money that typically might get cut. O&M funds might get cut the next year or 2 years if there's a recession again or whatever, right? So this fences that money and it's a huge help to everybody. So some of the best practices around this is using appropriated capital, if you have it, as a down payment to lower the finance principal. Just like you would do when you get a mortgage on a house, right? You try to come up with your 20% down to avoid your PMI insurance and so on, and lower your principal risk or your principal amount. Identify any incentives, right? There's a ton out now, right? I mean, this is the best I've ever seen in my whole career, federal, state, and local incentives. So go after those, and you can have your ESCO help with them. You want to secure an experienced FA, financial advisor, early to help with planning, right? If you don't have people in-house who have help with this, a lot of larger organizations already have FAs on board. You want to make sure they can help you with this early on, and make sure your internal finance, your outside advisor, and your ESCO work carefully to plan your cash flow, especially with all these different incentives. Like for utility incentives, which have been around for years, you get them paid in arrears, right? After the project is completed. So you have to plan for that. And the whole IRA thing, right? Which we don't know what's going to happen now with the change in administration. So if you're interested in getting that money, I would apply for it soon. So procurement considerations. So same thing with statutes. If you're going to be purchasing the services of an OR, an ESCO, financing, and so on, you need to make sure it's allowed in your state for depending on where you are in the hierarchy. You want to identify specific procurement requirements. We have a whole set of this. This is a link to the YouTube channel for the ESPC training, and understanding the program processes, right? Because there's a lot to this, right? As you've seen, if you've gone through these trainings before, you want to make sure the procurement folks are involved from the beginning and they understand, because it's a pretty heavy lift for procurement departments to do one of these. And you want to ensure a competitive environment, right? And we talked about this in our last training. So best practices around this is educating the staff early on and what ESPC really is versus the standard design bid build. It's really what happens most of the time now. So they have to understand this is going to get done a little bit differently than what it normally is. But usually with procurement staff, they love this because it saves them so much time. Instead of doing 3 or 4 procurements, they're now doing 1 or 2. And once they get over the fact that, okay, this is a little different than what we're used to doing, my goodness, it saves them a ton of time, ton of paperwork, ton of waiting, ton of aggravation. Another aspect of this is focusing on picking a partner, not a project, right? You want to make sure most people are used to bids for this dollars, low cost, best value, whatever. That's not what you're doing here, right? You're picking an ESCO partner with indicative pricing if you need it. You want to, and if you have built an ESPC network or you join one, consult your peers. That's one thing that we're finding in these workshops and things that we're doing with DOE. People are able to, bounce ideas off each other, which is super helpful. And I always used to do that. If I had clients, say in North Carolina, I used to get them together for dinners. 6 or 7 universities get them together for dinners during annual meetings, so everybody could sort of share experiences. Help them understand. I already talked about this. It's more complex, but it delivers multiple benefits. And again, I've had procurement people stop me in the hallways going, thanks so much for this. After the initial sort of pain of learning how this all works, they really loved it because I saved them a lot of time. And again, this is another example. We're not going to go through this, but this is a refresher from the second training is how you actually go through this, right? And as you can see, there's a lot of pieces and parts of putting together an RFP. And just by looking at this, you can see I need to get, Joe from facilities, Mary from financing, I need Bob from procurement to really get involved in this before I can even put anything on the street, right? And being able to put it out with confidence and credibility to the marketplace, right? You want to make sure you don't go off sort of with incomplete documents. So then, the ESPC marketplace won't take you as seriously. So as you can see, this is just a snapshot of what it takes to put one of these together, but it's key. So next stakeholder or set of stakeholders is your operations, maintenance, repair, and replacement folks. And they're usually the ones who are running those buildings day in, day in out, keeping your schools open, right? Your hospitals open during storms and all the stuff you've been seeing going on in the weather lately. Hats off to all these people. And I come from a family like this. My parents are immigrants and most of my family are laborers and tradesmen, and they do a lot of work every day and they don't often get thanked for what they do. Bringing them in to these projects from the very beginning will save your bacon, let me tell you, because if you can include them from the beginning and make them feel like they're part of the solution, this project will go well. If you don't do it, and this is what happens a lot, I see with architects and engineers that are designing new buildings, they work with leadership in their clients' base, but often don't talk a lot to the folks who are going to be running those nice, big, beautiful, award-winning buildings. And it shows, right? Within a few years, we get brought in, right, to help do a performance contract because that building doesn't work well, right? So absolutely key. And they're typically underfunded, understaffed, and under-equipped, right? ESPC can address a lot of that, right? Deferred maintenance, right? This is unbelievable backlog in public agencies around this country. There's billions and billions of dollars that need to be addressed. And ESPC can't do everything, can't repoint the bricks on your building, but boy, it can replace a lot of mechanical electrical infrastructure. And also can address IAQ. That's one thing about the pandemic. It really pulled off the Band-Aid on how bad HVAC is in schools in this country. Most buildings, but schools especially. The next thing with best practices for these, I already talked about getting them involved early on, right? Seek their input, right? No one involved in this deal will ever know how your buildings and the equipment inside those buildings work as well as these folks do. Right, the ESCO is going to send engineers in there. They're going to spend a couple of weeks on and off, but no one will ever know. Like I've seen guys that they could listen to a chiller and tell you what's wrong with it. Literally, like the chiller whisperer. It was hilarious. So educate the O&M staff between the differences in this and what goes on in design, bid, build, right? And I pointed out some of this before, but like there's rarely any real training with design bid build. They kind of get thrown, the books of the O&M, how to maintain all this stuff and the keys to the cabinets and all that, and the contractor's on their way, right? With performance contracting, we make sure the contracts include details on what kind of classroom training there's going to be, what kind of on-site training there's going to be. It's all going to be recorded. So you then have something that's for posterity as people change, right? Just turnover that happens in facilities. You can make sure that gets handled all the way through the term of the contract and explain the benefits to them. Doug?
Yeah, Chris, I was just going to add, in my history with ESPC projects at the state level, one thing with the O&M staff is their perception of these projects or implementing a project this way can be seen initially as threatening to them, that
Yes.
their job is going away because either the view is they're not doing it, the equipment's failing, when in reality the equipment is at its end of its useful life and needs to be replaced. And those O&M folks, as you pointed out, the chiller whisperer, they know far more about those systems than anyone else. They're the experts.
Yep.
They know where resources should be focused. And then post project, they're going to be relied upon to maintain the new equipment. So they need to
Yep.
understand the logic behind it. The operations will be different. Control systems will be updated. So it's super important to have them engaged through the process and help them understand this is not a threat at all. It's sort of shifting gears a bit and an opportunity for them to really learn and grow within their positions.
It really is. The ESPC, and again, we don't have time to get into the details of this, but it provides one of the best opportunities I have ever seen in my whole career for facilities, operations folks, maintenance folks to acquire new skills, new tools, and really jump up. I've seen folks get fabulous promotions while and after doing a performance contract, right? I've seen people move from one department to the other after the first pilot project went so well. They moved themselves to be the construction manager in the big project out here out west. A good example of this is I was doing work for North Carolina A&T. It's a historically Black college in Greensboro, North Carolina. And at one of the first meetings, the head of engineering got all of the maintenance people together at their like normal weekly meeting. It was like 30, 40 people in one room. And you could see, here's me and my engineers sitting up at the front of the room. And they're like, uh-oh, who's getting fired, right? Or something like this, and which happens. I've seen it. I've been all over the place and I've seen these things happen. And she did a masterful job of explaining to these folks why we're here, what's going to happen, and why we want them involved. And just the body language and how that changed in an instant, it made for a very successful project, right? It was just that, half hour of people's time who had to be in that meeting anyway, right? It made a huge difference, right? So I'll get off that, but it's a fabulous opportunity. Another opportunity to help these kinds of folks make sure your project is successful is utilize them for both your document review, right? If the ESCA is going to be submitting these reports that show, hey, here's how we think your equipment is operating. Well, they're the only ones who really know that, right? Your outside contractors, sometimes your service people, you want to have taken a look at it too, but they're the only ones who are really going to know how that stuff works, and you want to be able to get their input on that. And witnessing, right? This is a great opportunity for them to see how the stuff's getting installed, how it's the measurement and verification, which we talked about in a previous training, and the commissioning is getting done on site with their expertise and their input, so that when the project is finished, they know what actually was done. So when the ESCA puts in their reports of what we did, they'll be able to say yay or nay, whether it was actually done or not. And this next thing is the whole Internet of Things, right? This is a huge opportunity. If you saw one of my previous trainings, I think of it as switching from like an old flip phone to a new smartphone. That's where we need to take these buildings, and using your O&M folks who used to use these, hand tools, to now using computers and iPads and smartphones instead of having to drive. One of my clients here near Las Vegas, the next town in their county is 4 hours drive away. He would have to drive 4 hours to get to the next set of schools, right? So this just saves so much time, and it really makes your buildings a lot easier to manage going forward. And I already talked about the training here. Okay, next slide. Okay, construction, right? So this is when the project's getting implemented. Most people think, oh, we get the construction people involved now. No, you get them involved at the beginning so they know what to expect early on. And they'll be able to tell you, listen, we don't have enough folks to handle this project. We're going to need to hire some outside, either a person or a firm to do outside construction management, at least part-time. I've seen some clients do this. So some of the considerations are that there are existing rules and regs that must be followed. Almost every place has standards of design, comfort, all of this, how do we do painting on the building, soundproofing, all of that. You want to make sure all of that is included when you put that out into the marketplace. You want to be careful. Again, I learned this lesson the hard way, as well as if you're changing out light fixtures versus changing out lamps, you can trip an ADA code, and then you have to upgrade everything. Taking out china in the toilets and bathrooms, that can trip ADA requirements, and you have to renovate the whole bathroom, right? So there's things like that you want to know early on. Also, if there's any renovations you have coming up that could be integrated into this, you can do like a deep retrofit, where you take some of that money from the renovation, you put it into the performance contract, and you get them all done at one time. And that I've seen that done, like the Empire State Building did this, and it worked out fabulously. And you have a construction professional with the time to act as the ESCO liaison, right? This is key for seamless integration once you get to construction. If you don't have a person, make sure you find somebody, hire somebody on the outside to do that, and that can get paid for as part of the project. So some of the best practices around this is meet with the staff at the beginning, right? I keep repeating this, right? Everybody meet with them at the beginning so they all know what's going on. Don't wait, right? The more people know about this, the naysayers, you'll find out who they are, right? Early on, and you'll be able to take the time to get them onto your side, right? Through this stakeholder engagement process. You want to educate them as well about the differences between this and standard design bid build, right? Because they're used to having to keep a hawk's eye or eagle eye on contractors, right? And normal design bid build, there's a lot of this. Your contractor did something wrong, and it's design engineer, no, it's the architect. That doesn't happen with this. Again, if everyone is speaking the same language throughout the process, that usually doesn't happen. But boy, getting the construction people together from the beginning, working together, bi-weekly meetings, weekly meetings. Again, we're going to do a whole training just on that. But once they understand how this works, they're usually on board pretty quickly, because they see that they're not in an adversarial position with the ESCO. They're actually doing this in a collaborative sense. And again, it's very similar to other stakeholder groups. Explain the benefits to them. Like, they're going to get new, fully commissioned equipment. You rarely see real commissioning in any project. I don't care whether they hired a commissioning agent or not. A lot of it today, in the public sphere at least, because the public agencies don't have the wherewithal to sue contractors a lot, they end up getting stuck with buildings where they were checking boxes versus really doing commissioning. So there's a lot of commissioning requirements in these contracts, which is absolutely key to making them successful, including getting as-built drawings. And this is a real joke in the construction industry, where as-built drawings basically get done by whoever's the lowest on the totem pole at the subcontractor level, right? And I'll get the young kid to do that. He's good with computers, right? And they never are really as-built. And they're supposed to reflect what actually got installed, right? With a performance contract, usually you don't accept the project at the very end until they're showing the savings and the as-built drawings are submitted. So you have leverage to do that, right? And again, it's all part of another training when we get into it in a few months. I already talked about this, and have them also assist with witnessing, approvals, and invoice review. Absolutely key to success. So oversight considerations and best practices. We talked about this a lot at the beginning. Again, there's certain statutes, like here in Nevada, where I live now, all state agencies that do a performance contract must have an outside owner's rep review the IGA, the investment grade audit, right? It's the law. Same thing in North Carolina and a few other states. It's required in every federal project, right? They figure that out. Somebody must review all of this stuff before it gets implemented. And owner's reps are really getting hired more and more. It's one of the things we're starting to see RFPs come out on the street now that include that owner's rep certificate series that I talked about at the beginning. as sort of a prerequisite, which I think is great, because that way you know they actually have learned something. And again, it's not somebody that's just dabbling in it because they're a little slow in their design business, say. And owners reps can really help save time, money, and a lot of aggravation. Again, I wish I'd had these back in the 90s when I was working for an ESCO. And when I got to work on the owner's side, it really helped them save a ton of time and aggravation. And again, we can go back and look at these previous slides. Lastly, the last approval, excuse me, the last stakeholder group is the approval authorities, right? So, and this can vary widely, right? Depending if you're a small town, you usually don't have a whole lot of approval authorities other than maybe, city council, mayor's office, whatever. If you're a university, I have found, like when I used to do this for probably 4 different university systems, multiple levels of approval authorities had to go through 3 or 4 different levels of approval. And if you didn't time them purposely, you could be in a lot of trouble, right? So again, statutes, what has to be followed, right? Which internal and external stakeholders must be included in this process? That is something that needs to be figured out from the very beginning. Because if you miss one entity, you have to go back to the beginning. I literally saw this with the university. One approval authority got missed, the board date change or whatever. The next time we could get on the final approval authority schedule was 3 to 4 months out. The lock on the financing expired. It was a nightmare, right? So these are the kind of things that need to get done from the beginning. And knowing this project development process early on will save you so much time. In this life cycle I talked about at the beginning, you can take a project that might take 3 years to get done, get it done in 1.5 years to 2 years, because you're optimizing that life cycle, because you knew who to talk to within the different stakeholder groups when, right? So that's absolutely key. And another thing I've sat through board meetings, I've gone to like state Senate hearings on camera, all these kinds of things. And I learned some valuable lessons doing these. Can this approval authority give you approval to negotiate agreements, either the IGA agreement or the actual ESPC agreement, or do they need to see the full negotiated agreement, right? This is a huge difference, right? And it's better to get the negotiation approval, because it could take another few weeks. Once you've gotten sort of the project identified of what you want to do, then you get the approval to move forward. Because getting all the T's crossed and I's dotted, very hard to do, right? There's all these different moving parts, which again we'll cover in the next training. Some of the best practices, again, like many of the others, bring them in early. Even if the requirement is you don't need to come here until you have a fully vetted project, let them know early, right? Let them just, even when you have an owner's rep does sort of a high-level pre-qualification audit for you, just give them a highlight, a quick briefing. I've done this with some school districts where they did a really high-level briefing to the school board, knowing that in 6 months we'll be back. When that 6 months came around, they're like, oh yeah, I remember this, right? So it really makes it a lot smoother, because they'll have heard about it already, right? So, and early and often, we would go back multiple times to school boards or city councils, whatever, to make sure that they got the improving levels of detail. Also, bring your owner's rep at the beginning to approval meetings so they can be the expert, at your shoulder answering some tough questions. I used to like to say, we'll take the tough questions. That's what we're here for. That's what you're paying us for. And your owner's rep and your ESCO, when you get to like the big meetings where, we're asking you for $10 million or $20 million in approval to do this big construction project in the high school or the cafeteria, whatever the case may be, you want to have them there helping you answer these questions. Having informal briefings, wow, I have found that saves so much time, off-camera questions. So some people don't want to ask you questions in front of everybody. That way they can answer the questions before they get in front of the camera, but before everything is being recorded, and really help you get a successful project smoothly approved. And this is another big one. I've been worked in multiple states where there's like a state public works division or a construction department feels that they usually run projects. Here, this performance contract is handled by another statute outside of what they normally do in design, bid, build. So they feel excluded. And some folks really are like, we don't want to see this done. And they make that no, right? And it doesn't really work very well for the folks trying to do a performance contract, what we've done in several states, reached out to them directly and say, listen, we know that this is not going through your shop, but we'd like to have your input. We'd be willing to pay. Sometimes it's a 0.5%, 1% fee, which is going to come out of the financing, of course, right? But it gets them involved in the project, and it keeps things from being, you know, I wouldn't say sabotage, but sometimes they're going to make it difficult for you, right? So that is a very hard lesson I've learned through this project, and include their fees in the cash flow. Makes everybody happy, right? And timing, the last thing here is timing the financial RFP, the IGA completion, and this ESPC agreement, the three-legged stool you may hear me refer to in the trainings, to streamline the approval process, right? Because people are going to ask you a lot of questions depending on which of these stakeholder groups they're coming from. You want to make sure you have all the answers and that they come from these three different parts of this process. And here's an example, right? Getting to know this approval process, make sure the team understands it. I've probably gone through all of this already. I talked about the veto power, feedback. There's sometimes intermediate components that need to get done. You want to make sure you know that early on, and all the different levels that are required. All right, that is it. We've got resources. Again, these are all live links.
Chris, but before we move into the resources,
Yep.
and we've got this here too, there is one new question in the chat.
Sure.
So how do we best address the requirements for the ESCO to use eProject Express? Are there any examples of language to include in the IGA or ESPC contract?
Yes. Thank you, Jenny. That's a great question and one of my favorite ones. eProject Express is a fabulous platform. I wish I had it when I was doing this 20, 25 years ago. If you know what that is, for those of you who don't, so it's a free online secure platform that Department of Energy hired Lawrence Berkeley Lab to create. And it was eProject Builder for the federal group first, and then they basically changed it for the MUSH market. And what we're starting to do in these best practices documents, we're seeing that DOE is just about to put out on the street that requires EPX to be used, right? What it really comes down to is the enforcement, right? So it's one thing to include it in the ESCO's contract. It's another thing to get the ESCO to actually put the stuff in. And that's not that hard, right? But it's something, one of the ways I've seen to get it done is when you're reviewing proposals, make sure it's in the RFP, right? Number one, make sure that, this is going to be a requirement of the contract. Please state in your response that you are willing to do this. And then when you review the responses, you down select to say 3 or 4 interviewees, ask them that question in person, right? To their face in the interview. Are you going to be doing eProject Express for us? The answer better be yes, right? Or like, oh, or I'm not sure. No, you're out, right? So, because it's not just a documentation sort of storage platform. It gives you the ability to sort and report. And, you may have people above you need to report these things to. I've never seen anything like it in this industry. And it's going to help you. I think it's going to help you get more grants in the future. Like Department of Energy loves to see their tools being utilized. That's why you'll see we're trying to show a lot of the tools that we spend a lot of time and money, honestly, taxpayer money, developing. We want to make sure they get used. And EPX is one of the best ones I've seen. And it helps with the turnover, where I've talked about a few times in this. What I was helping the lab develop eProject Builder about 8 or 10 years ago. And I would go to my clients to try to get the stuff put into eProject Builder. I couldn't even find files from the ESCOs. They were already in cold storage 2 or 3 years later, right? And a lot of the folks at my clients' facilities, they had moved on or they'd retired, and the laptop that it was on was lost, right? Or the computer broke or whatever. You couldn't get that stuff. So that all gets saved in eProject Express. There are examples if you want. Just send me an email. Directly, my info's at the end of this, and I can send you some examples if you like. Did that answer your question?
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay.
This is really good because I know there
right.
are people that are like still opposing it. So
Oh, I know.
you have some example.
Yeah, one of the issues around that, and I mean, to just pull the Band-Aid off, is some ESCOs feel that they're going to be volunteering proprietary information, all right? Well, and this is my opinion. It's not Department of Energy's opinion, right? It's my opinion that you are working for a public entity. You're signing a public contract, right? Everything that is part of that contract can be FOI'd by anyone, right? And a lot of entities have sunshine laws, like in Florida and other states. Any contract that gets signed, anyone can look at, right? So I don't see that as a good reason why they shouldn't be doing it. I would think that it's good for them, because as they have internal takeover, or turnover rather, they lose people. And if they took their laptop with them, whatever, you just don't get stuff. So I think it's super, super helpful.
Okay.
But thanks,
Thank
that's a great question. Any other questions? All right, we'll keep moving here. So the resource links, again, this networking toolkit communications plan is great. The Ally in Your Corner has some great examples of how an owner's rep can help you. Engagement resources, again, a lot of the stuff that I've sort of zipped through here quickly gets handled in a lot more detail in this Champions Toolkit as well. We have a bunch of podcasts that ESC did 4 or 5 years ago about all of these topics around performance contracting. And there's eProject Express, and Portfolio Manager can be helpful as well.
And just a reminder, those links in the slide deck you'll receive are live, so you can just click on them and they'll take you right to those resource sets.
Right. Cool. And then the ESPC campaign itself, right? This is a fabulous, fabulous thing. Laura Carpenter is on here, has been doing a great job managing it. It's really here to help engage everybody that's out here in the mush market, all of you, and your peers, to support the use of performance contracting, increase efficiency, modernize building, reduce costs, increase resilience. And for me, again, having done this in every which way you can imagine, design bid build, deboom, performance contracting, P3, I've pretty much seen it all at this point. From my perspective, this is the single best tool you have at working for a public entity to get a lot of stuff done in a short period of time. It gets financed. You can handle a lot of challenges like deferred maintenance we talked about, like resilience. We're seeing this now. I mean, with these, it's God forbid it happens where you live, but the floods, the fires, there's people in Asheville, North Carolina, my goodness, it's just horrible, right? So performance contracting can address this, right? We wrote a whole, back years, we wrote a whole book for the state of Rhode Island for resilience and performance contracting, right? So that you could use this. This is what the federal government does. They use this for resilience day in, day out, right? We're trying to use the ESPC campaign to push this out into the mush market and share and leverage the practical resources, right? Like a lot of these toolkits that we're talking about here, and amplify and implement these best practices, right? The more we can get out there, get folks like you on these calls, the trainings, the webinars, and you can then share with other people in your organizations, the more impact we're going to have, right? And we want to be able to do this. And for me, I'm at the tail end of my career, and I'm looking at scaling and replicating what's been done here this past 20, 25 years to really fight the ravages of climate change as quickly as we possibly can. And showcasing these achievements, there's a lot of great stuff that's been done, and we want to be able to get case studies. If you have case studies, please get them into us so we can show everyone else what's getting done out there. I've seen some fabulous things done that I talked about in the last workshop that we had. A high school that replaced its whole fire alarm system using performance contracting. They had false alarms that was the fire department were charging them for it, and they were able to use that, and they embedded it in the rest of the contract that worked out great. So there's a lot of great things that can be done through this campaign. So if you haven't joined, please join.
And I did drop that direct link in the chat to click on that and subscribe. So it'll be in the slides, but it's right there as well.
All right.
If you're not already a member, not already a participant, or you have colleagues or others that may have interest, please send them to that link.
Excellent. Thanks, Deb. So upcoming events, we've got Thursday the 21st, benefits of ESPC or finance and leadership. Hard to believe that's next week. That's going to be great. We're going to have some great guest speakers from some cities and towns around the country and finance folks to talk about what they've actually done and seen as benefits for them and for their finance folks and for their leadership, right? What ESPC has really done for them. Not just, I told you all about facilities folks, of course, gets tons of benefits. Procurement folks get tons of benefits, but the financial leadership folks really see a lot of benefits from this. We have people from Santa Fe and a few other places. So then on December 5th, paying for your project, right? How to really understand the financials, right? What kinds of financing can you do? How do you leverage contributed funds, like I talked about a little bit at the beginning, whether it's, this direct pay funding that's coming out of the IRA funding, or utility rebates, or state incentives, whatever the case may be, how to leverage them to really cash flow your project in the best way possible, right? Or capital stacking, the MBA guys like to call it. And then the EECBG Blueprint cohort, as part of the ACEEE and the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, hired NASCO, National Association of Energy Service Companies, to put together this cohort of folks that are getting these grants from the IRA, or actually from the bipartisan infrastructure law, on financing and understanding project cash flow pro formas and learn how to secure financing. So a lot of these are all working together, as you can see, in the next month or so, to really help folks like you learn a lot more about how to pull these deals off from a financial point of view. And then lastly, these office hours that we're offering. And it's myself and a few other folks like me who are available whenever you are available to be able to talk about this topic, any topic you really want around performance contracting or anything related to that. I can help answer pretty much anything you want about energy, lighting to demand response and state representatives and so on and so forth. So this is a live link again for office hours sign up. You just, click on it, send in the form. It'll get routed to me or one of the other owners reps, and we'll set up a time to talk with you about really, like I said, anything you want. So please use this, because again, I feel like, I've been rushing through this to get this done in an hour, and there's a lot of information here. And again, this typically takes me half a day to get through with my clients. So I'd love to be able to spend more time with you and really help you learn how to get some great projects done. All right. Any more questions? We still got 15,
Chris,
20 minutes.
Yeah, there is a new question in the chat. Not sure if you can see that.
I see it. What would be your advice? Okay.
And while you're addressing that, I'm going to launch our final poll.
Okay.
Again, we're always trying to make these trainings and webinars more relevant and useful for you. So we have some questions that, if you can answer those, would help us a lot in helping shape future events to make sure that they're meeting the needs that you have.
Okay, great. Thanks. So let me see if I can move that out of the way here. Okay, so this is from Beatrice. Thanks, Beatrice, for your question. So what would be your advice if an energy savings project is joining the ESPC campaign and the project is currently going through the contract development process, phase 3 of the project's life cycle? Okay. Number one, do you have an owner's rep on board? That would be my first question. If you haven't hired one, unless you and your staff, I'm not sure where you're from, but if your staff have done a bunch of these and you feel comfortable handling it yourself, you may be fine. That's one thing where I've had clients bring us in at this point, right? They've put out an ESCO RFP, they've hired an ESCO, and they're writing the contract now, the IGA agreement with them now, right? It's a really good time to get somebody involved. And it all goes back to the very first thing under stakeholder engagement I talked about was setting expectations, right? Sometimes you've had ESCOs, and a lot of you probably had multiple ESCOs in your offices telling you all the wonderful things about performance contracting, how that can help do virtually everything for you, right? Cornucopia of benefits. It's mostly true. Some of it gets a little embellished to get you interested and so on, like anybody who's trying to sell anything. But what you really want is get somebody who's independent and helps you understand what's real about this and what's maybe a little rosy looking to get you involved, right? And that includes contract development, right? So you want to make sure that your contracts are being reviewed by folks who have a lot of experience doing this. And again, this is where I ended up going in my business after years. I hired engineers under me to do all the technical review. I ended up focusing on the contracts because that is where, right, like I said at the very beginning, you hope you never need your contract, right? Because that's usually use your contract like in anything in life. You only use that if something's gone wrong. But boy, do you want to make sure it says what you want it to say and it's protecting you, right? It's got to be fair and balanced, right? But owner's interests come first in all of these contracts. And you'll see if you went to another one of our trainings, you never take the ESCO's contract, right? Ever. You always use a third-party contract. The Energy Services Coalition has them, and U.S. Department of Energy has them. As we said, it's in one of these links that we showed. I could go on and on, but another thing is making sure that your folks, now that you've listened to this, your folks who are going to be involved in this from front to back are all involved now, right? During the contract development process, right? Your legal, of course, finance, budgeting, operations and maintenance, design and construction, any of your inside and outside approval authorities are, because, and again, I've lived this one the hard way back when I was much younger and doing this. And we show up at a meeting with the attorneys and they're like, sorry, you didn't give us 2 weeks notice of full documents for us to review before meeting with you. So they threw us out, right? And the project champion person didn't know that. The lawyers never told them, right? So it's that sort of a thing that can really stop you dead, right? And especially, and if you have some sort of a deadline you're looking to hit, that's a killer, right? So back to what I was saying earlier, making sure everybody that's internal and external stakeholder groups know what's going on early on. And contract development, this is one of the really important junctures back to this slide, the very beginning. Here, right? You're in this process.
Yes.
You're going to be, right? You're going to be, great. Yeah, feel free to chime in here. So you're going to be reviewing and approving this contract. Boy, it's, again, I hate to overstate this, but getting outside expert input on that, right? We've been called, Laura's gotten calls at, 11th hour. This is getting approved at the board meeting in 3 days. Can you help us? Don't put yourself in that position, right? Make sure you get some help early on. And again, if you want to sit in office hours form, I'm more than happy to spend an hour going through this with you in detail, because there's a lot to it.
Yes, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yet as Laura reminds us in the chat, that you're welcome to join the campaign at any stage of the project.
Yes.
And that enables you to access the office hours and other support to help get you to the end and quicker and in the right direction with all the appropriate sort of quality control. And that the savings for the project, regardless, will help contribute to this collective $1 billion energy cost savings goal.
Right. Another important thing about this too, and I mentioned a little bit earlier, but again, I was trying to get through all the material in time, is something I think, Jenny, was part of your question, is who has access to the information, right? For those of you that are on this, right, you're the most interested person in your organization, right? Obviously, you're the one on this call. Sometimes it's your superior said, hey, I want you to tune in on this, see if this is something for us, right? What I have found, and one of the reasons we send out the PDF version to everybody, is once you sit through one of these, and if you like what you've heard, hopefully you have, and hopefully you find it helpful, send this to other folks in your organization and go, listen, this is something that can really help us, right? And if you don't believe me, right? Again, I've lived that. Right? I was an energy manager for a huge corporation, worldwide corporation, and I would have to hire outside people because it's just Chris saying what he thinks is right. We needed the outside person to validate it, right? Which is hilarious, but that's the way it is. And getting those other people in your organization to come on to the next webinar, right? Come on to the next training and start to circulate it within your agency and go, oh, wow, this really is something we need to join this, right? And once you start pulling the information into your organization and spreading it in your organization, your job, if you're the project champion, and most of you that are that end up on these are the project champions, in effect, your job becomes that much easier. It's like train the trainer, right? You're not the one doing all the hard work. You're getting them involved in these, and they're learning real time from experts like us who've been doing this for decades, and saving you a lot of time in integration, right? Or when you call them into the big meeting, they already know what to expect. So you're not having to defend something that you're pretty new to in front of a big group of people. You've gotten a lot of the people that are in those meetings early on already briefed to this, or you can send them these slides and sit down in a meeting and kind of go over them with them and answer questions, or go, you know what, I don't know that answer, but I know somebody I can ask, right? And you send in that office hour form and get me on the phone. And then I'm happy to get on the phone with them. You know, you can bring them into these office hours. You know, we can get a whole group meeting with all of your internal stakeholders that want to do one of these projects or have a bunch of questions like you, Beatrice, and you're not sure want to do, bring your attorney. You know, I deal with attorneys day in, day out. I'd be more than happy to help you get through a particular issue so you can get on to the next step.
Thank you. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
You're welcome. Because at the end of the day, like I said, for me, I've been doing this for decades. I'm interested in helping the folks like you and your colleagues get as much of this done as fast as possible, as well as possible, right? We don't want to make perfect the enemy of the good, but we need a lot of this done, right? We're seeing this with all of the stuff that's happening with climate change, and it's destroying infrastructure daily, right? There's no way to catch up. There's no insurance. There's not enough insurance money. There's not enough, you know, capital appropriations to fix all this stuff on top of all the deferred maintenance backlog that there is around the country, you know? So anyway, I, as you can tell, I'm kind of passionate about this stuff, and I'm more than happy to help with anybody on here that wants to have some more direct input. So hopefully this has been helpful and informative and educational. And, you know, we love helping, and we want to help make you successful in what you do, really, at the end of the day. So again, if you haven't joined, please do join the campaign. We'd love to see you. Let me get down to the end here. I think, whoops, we went off. Okay. I think we went off that. Hold on. Can you still see my screen?
Can still see it,
Yeah.
not in presentation mode, but we're looking
Okay.
at the ESPC
that's what
campaign
happened.
slide.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I went back into hit the wrong button. Let me get my cursor back over there.
Yeah, so just to wrap up, we're almost at time, and we've had some good questions come up throughout the presentation today. Chris, if you can go to the last slide, which has your contact information.
Yeah, hold on, I'm trying to get back to that.
Yeah, for follow-up.
My cursor is not cooperating with me.
Well, everyone who attended today will get a copy of the slides after we conclude, and has, again, all of the
There
information
we go.
as a resource, as well as links to this information. There is the Energy Services Coalition's website, as well as Chris's direct email address if you have questions and need follow-up after this. So we appreciate your attention this afternoon again. Again, this is a progression. It's building knowledge bit by bit, you know, brick by brick. And it is a lot of information, but again, it's worthwhile. And each day you become more of an expert and become more of a leader on your team to help drive projects forward. So appreciate your commitment and participation.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate taking the time. Have a great day.
Have a great afternoon. Yep.